ברוכים הבאים לשומר, סף מספר 53, והפרק הזה יהיה באנגלית. This episode will be in English. אם אתם שומעים אותנו באודיו ולא נוח לכם באנגלית, אז בווידאו יהיו לנו כתוביות. And on this episode we have the privilege and the honor to speak to Lee Smith, whose books I've been reading. I've been reading your books more than once each. Hi, Lee.
Wow,
How
okay.
are you?
Thank you. That's very kind, Getty. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you and speaking with your great Israeli audience.
And are you at home in D.C.?
I am. I'm home in D.C. We're getting ready for the election, of course, next Tuesday, less than a week away. And of course, we're also preparing for the various threats of chaos and violence that we've been getting here over the last several months. So we hope to avoid both chaos and violence, and that there will be a peaceful election, and that we will once again enjoy either a peaceful transition of power to the Democrats, should the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris ticket win, or there will be, for once, Donald Trump will get to enjoy a relatively peaceful term, as he did not in his first term, which is what those books that you've read are about. And I just wanted to thank you for reading my books, and again for bringing me on today. It's a real pleasure.
You were my first guide. You and Andy McCarthy, because I asked a smart American friend who is not a crazy anti-Trump. There are not many of these, and he told me here's what you should read. Read Lee Smith and Andrew McCarthy, which is what I did, and that was my first guide to anything, because here it's a complete blackout. It's like, imagine people would only see CNN; they would know nothing about what is really going on. When we spoke, I think it was some 2 weeks ago, you were optimistic about Trump's chances to win. Are you still? Do you think?
Yeah, I'm still very optimistic. I know what the polls say. However, the polls were, of course, wrong in 2016. The other way to look at it, I think, is we know that the news media is entirely compromised. You talk about CNN. The problem isn't just that CNN has not reported it, just as they're not reporting all the problems with Hunter Biden. The fact is that CNN was in at the very earliest stages of the operation to target Donald Trump. So it's not just that they have a vested interest. It's not just that they're partisan. It's that they were part of the operation, and that's how I see it, as an operation. Anyway, to come back to your question about what is likely to happen in the next week, I think it's a strange idea. The idea that of all other things in the media, the one thing that's real and true are the polls. They may be true. I'm not counting on the fact they are. I tend to look at not only the enthusiasm for Donald Trump. You may see the different rallies he's held and the spontaneous parades, which are really quite marvelous. But the fact is, the United States here over the last since the end of May, so we're at the point half a year, right? Has been major American cities have been targeted, lots of violence, most recently in Philadelphia. Yeah. So I tend to believe that my neighbors, my fellow Americans, are especially sensitive to the fact they don't want to be voting for a ticket that applauds violence and that has deployed violence at different points. Because we have to remember that Black Lives Matter and the Democratic National Committee have a financial relationship, which BLM makes quite clear on their website. So this is not something that's being made up. And lots of American voters know this, and again, they're very upset. We all like peace and stability, whether we're living in, whether we're in Tel Aviv or whether we're in Washington D.C. And unfortunately, here in the United States, we've not enjoyed a tremendous amount of that the last 6 months.
When the riots started, my knowledge of America is acquired. It's not instinctive. I'm not an American.
You know an awful lot about it. Everything from not just the politics. You and I have spoken about American poetry before and American literature. So.
Because it's my passion. It was even my passion when my first literary love was Damon Runyon.
Really? Huh.
And Damon Runyon, to me, to this day, has something quintessentially American about, the idea of the guy, the gambler, who is every morning is new. There's no past and everything else. So, but I'm not. I can't measure I don't have instincts like I would have in Israel. So, I thought when the riots start, I thought it's a done deal. That's it. Donald Trump won, and I was surprised to see that the polls didn't go wham to his side, because I thought if I know anything about America, then law and order and the fact that burning businesses is wrong and private property is sacred. And how could this be that someone would win an election like Kamala Harris saying, the riots would go on. They'll go on after the elections. How can you win with that? So why didn't the polls shift like full tilted to Trump? I was surprised.
Yeah, I can't explain why the polls didn't shift, but I will tell you, I mean, there are numbers more important or as important as polls. So here are some of the numbers that I look at. The numbers that I'm looking at is the number of first-time gun sales, which for 3 months in a row set records, right? So Americans are buying guns. Americans are looking to protect themselves. They're extremely worried about what's happened. Another thing that's happened that I'm sure you've heard of is a number of Americans who are leaving major American cities. Most prominently, of course, New York, where I'm from, where I was raised. I live in Washington now, but where I was raised, a lot of people have moved either to Connecticut, surrounding areas like Greenwich, or one of my brothers lives, or further upstate, or out to Long Island, or they've moved to Florida, or they've moved out. So we're looking at, by some accounts, 500,000 people. And these are wealthy people and people who can afford it. But we're talking about, that's a lot of people. So they're responding to this violence. More significantly, and this I don't have numbers for, but I can relate this to you anecdotally, one of the most important things for our elite classes is to ensure, and I understand in Israel it's somewhat similar but different. I think that in Israel, right, it has to do with you want to be in elite units of the military, right? That's how you ensure the networking ability of your offspring. Here in the United States, our elite wants to reproduce itself by ensuring its children have great spaces in private high schools. I mean, it's madness. You see parents doing whatever they can to ensure their kids have places at kindergartens, right? Not just high schools, never mind colleges, but in kindergartens. My understanding is that lots of families, lots of parents have abandoned these places. In places like New York, where it's extremely difficult and very competitive to get in these schools. So these are the different things that tell me they don't necessarily translate into support for Donald Trump. But what it does say is, it says that people responded to this violence in the way that we would expect them to respond. They were scared. They wanted to get out. They don't like it, right? Another thing that people say about it when they talk about the polls, a lot of people have said, well, of course, places like CNN aren't really reporting it, right? I'm sure you've seen that famous segment where there's the one CNN reporter, the most
fiery but peaceful,
right. And there's an entire building being burned down behind him, and that was laughable. And so a lot of people have come up with the idea, which is reasonable, that CNN was blocking a lot of this coverage, that it wasn't getting through to people, and that's partly true. But let's remember, these were blue cities that were being razed and looted, right? So if you're a New Yorker, you didn't need to depend on CNN to see that New York was being razed and looted, right? You could walk out on your street or walk into an adjacent neighborhood and see what was happening. So a lot of people actually did understand what was going on, right? CNN viewers, these are not people who live in red states. These are people who live in blue cities. New York, Boston, Washington, Los Angeles. They themselves, another relative who lives in Los Angeles was telling me, as the violence started to pick up, they left Los Angeles. They went to a place that they felt was going to be safer for their family. A lot of people did this. A lot of people saw precisely what happened. So again, this doesn't precisely translate into Trump votes, but it says one thing. It says that the American electorate is rational. They see what's going on, and they're not repressing this. They actually understand what's going on. So that's my take right now.
I have a friend who I've been in contact with since my study days in America, and I don't want to say his name because this is embarrassing what he said to me. But this is a well-informed person, a professor, and he actually told me that Donald Trump does not have a policy, that it's all just wild contingency.
Right.
And I guess he's reading the New York Times mostly. So how can it be that so, and also, and this is perhaps the most striking, I told him, but look, at least there was this corrupt investigation into Donald Trump. And he said, no, but there was Russian interference, and they should have investigated it. And it was logical that they would also suspect the candidate. So is there is half the population not know what is really going on, what you reported in your book?
Yeah, well, I'm at a bit of an advantage because having grown up in New York, I've had Donald Trump's voice ringing in my ears for 4 decades. So Donald Trump is fired. Things. Yeah. That's part of it, right? For many years, right? Donald Trump has been a celebrity, a real estate developer, a playboy, right? All of these different things. The idea that somehow he had this secret life as a Russian asset that started when he was at the head of Celebrity Apprentice was just on its face preposterous, right? And my opinion of journalism is it's a profession that I still like very much. But what's the profession about? We're not intellectuals. We're not brilliant people. We don't really play this profound role in government that many people say. We're not here to speak truth to power. We're not here to hold government officials accountable. We're here to do one thing, from my perspective. We are here to represent the common sense of the American people. And when something sounds stupid, say, that sounds stupid, I don't believe it. Prove it. They never proved it, right? There was never a case. I had many other reasons as well. Look, because when there used to be there used to be a newspaper here in our country called the New York Times, which is one of the most prestigious press organizations in the world. And when it had a real reporting team. Also in New York, we have the New York City Police Department, which aside from now their persecution of Orthodox Jews at the behest of Bill de Blasio, which is a very sad development for the New York Police Department, which I still regard as the world's greatest police department, as well as the FBI's New York field office. Donald Trump in New York was involved for nearly half a century in the 2 most mobbed up businesses in America. Casinos, one, and the other was real estate, where you have to deal with construction people and everything like that.
And the unions.
Exactly. These are industries that are heavily mobbed up. The FBI, you can guarantee it. The real FBI, the people who actually do the work, as well as the New York Police Department, had been watching Donald Trump's business and everyone he was dealing with for a long time, right? They had nothing. They had to come up with this nonsense about Russia collusion, right? If there was something really wrong with Donald Trump, right, you would know where to look. It's like, well, what kind of a deal is he getting on cement, right? What's going on at these casinos? But that tells you and how long they've been looking at Donald Trump. Bizarrely, this is something that no one ever would have expected. He's perhaps the cleanest president in American history. Donald Trump, he never brags about this. He says, I've probably done more for the Black community since Abraham Lincoln. He brags about that. What he never says is, I'm probably the most honest, or maybe not most, but the cleanest president in American history since George Washington. But look at what happened. They spied on his campaign. They spied on the presidency. And you can bet, had they found one thing, they would have thrown him in jail. They have nothing on him. So anyway, that's my Russia collusion thing. But you're talking about Trump's policy, which is actually a part of this. Because Donald Trump ran on the idea that there is a swamp, there is a deep state, there's an establishment inside the Beltway that includes That includes the press, that includes the intelligence bureaucracies, it includes political operatives on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans. And he ran against that, saying there's a swamp and they're really bad, and I'm going to go in and drain the swamp. Well, as it turns out, he didn't understand how bad the swamp really was. And that's kind of what these operations against Donald Trump, that's what I call these phony investigations, operations. That's what it's been about, these people fighting back against Donald Trump. So that helps set up how to answer about Donald Trump's policy, right? Many of the policymakers inside of Washington are part of this swamp. They have a standard way of doing things, a certain way of understanding the world. And we can, if it's not too, since we're talking about all sorts of controversial issues, not least of which is the American president right now, we can talk about the idea of Arab-Israeli peace. All right. So we have an establishment here in Washington since at least Oslo, but going back even before. They've had very specific ideas of what Arab-Israeli peace should look like. Donald Trump came and said, at first, he was interested in that idea. He said, okay, yeah, Palestinian, Israel, that's the deal of all deals. I want to make that. I want to be a part of it.
We all said when that happened, we said, oh, no, not again. Not another American president who thinks he can solve this.
Exactly. A big concern. And this guy comes in saying, a deal. Oh, great. Right. Fantastic. Even more disastrous. But as it turns out, by not listening to the establishment, Donald Trump managed to work out something else instead. So when people say that Donald Trump does not have a policy, what they mean is that Donald Trump does not follow, or he is not beholden to the institutional structures inside the Beltway that prohibit certain actions while encouraging and urging others. So no, Donald Trump, of course, has a policy, and there are many, many different policies about many different things. His priorities in terms of trade and foreign policy are both about China, right? He had a policy to get out of the Iran deal. He had a policy to knock the regime into penury, and this is what's happened. So no, the idea that Donald Trump is just flying on the seat of his pants is nonsense. And the way that I like to describe his Twitter feed is to say, I'm one of the few people you may speak with who thinks that the president needs to tweet more. Not only because I think a lot of the times it's very funny and entertaining, but what I call now the nationalist movement in the United States, meaning people who are proud to be Americans, people who don't think that we should be a borderless country. Basically, the American, how can I put this? The American equivalent of Zionists, saying we love our country, we like our country the way it is. We don't want to erase our distinct identity. We think it's important. So for that nationalist movement, our media is extremely limited. We have parts of Fox News. We have some very excellent websites, a couple of newspapers, but Donald Trump is really the aircraft carrier. Donald Trump's Twitter feed is how a lot of information is provided. So even that, I think, is how people need to understand the president's Twitter feed. He's not just throwing stuff off the top of his head, not all the time, maybe some of the time. But no, I think in many ways he's extremely studied character.
Before I leave this subject, because we are so tense here, so what is your prediction? Is it going to be a landslide? Is it going to be a tipping point? What kind of Trump victory do you foresee?
There are a lot of people who are looking at different states that he didn't win last time, like New Hampshire, like Nevada, like Minnesota. That's not really my field of expertise. I mean, what I'll say is, again, I think that, look, obviously a lot of people are angry, frustrated about the coronavirus. And unfortunately, if you're the president, you will be held responsible for that. Even though in many ways, like the economy, the president's are only marginally responsible for how the economy does, depending on legislation and regulation. But certainly he will be held accountable by lots of voters for the coronavirus. And Is that fair? No, lots of things aren't fair in politics. Nonetheless, I do think it's likely that the president will be reelected, because even though that many people think that Donald Trump is some sort of that this is just a total freak show, not like anything else we've seen. No, he is an incumbent president. And if you saw, again, other numbers that had nothing to do with polling, but, or, state by state presidential election polling, 56% of the American public think they're better off now than they were 4 years ago. And this
I saw that. That's Gallup, right?
Yeah, that's astonishing.
Right? It is astonishing. So let's watch the trailer of your film together, and then we can talk about the plot against the president. Let's see if I can run it successfully on this machine. Here we go.
Now, the Russiagate hoax is all documented.
There was an illusion being created using the most awesome tools and the greatest tricks that the American intelligence community had learned to use against our enemies. Now it was being deployed against the American people and our president.
This is the biggest political scandal in modern history, which makes Watergate look like a tiff.
The FBI director has no credibility.
The left used to not trust the FBI, and now they love them.
If this can happen to General Michael T. Flynn, imagine what they do to anybody who has a single strike against them.
35 Russian diplomats in the U.S. expelled.
The prosecution of General Flynn wasn't a pursuit of criminal activity, it was a setup.
Flynn actually had details. So he was talking about going after people's budgets. They were terrified.
Media didn't start as neutral. Media hasn't been neutral all its life.
The two faces of Hillary Clinton are coming out. The fact through WikiLeaks that she says one thing and
Oh no.
They worked hand in glove with Comey to try to delegitimize Trump. They were not there to tell the truth.
A political dirty trick is being carried out by our intelligence community.
Honestly, none of us really know, sort of holistically, what to think about this dossier.
They went into Congress. They said, there's nothing here. Doesn't matter. We'll keep going with FISA. We'll keep going with the investigation. And more importantly, we will go on TV day in and day out and lie to the American people to their face. And nothing's going to happen to us.
The nation and all of our freedoms hang by a thread. And the military apparatus of this country is about to be handed over to scum who are beholden to scum. Russian scum.
We had not one person claim that they had or had seen evidence of Trump colluding with the Russians.
Devin Nunes was the hero in the forest. He was alone, he was mocked, he was attacked.
Devin Nunes was subject to such scorn for saying the conclusions that we brought forth in that report, which all proved to be true.
Russiagate was a false story.
To target their political opposition.
To carry out their insurance policies.
I believe this is a conspiracy.
These guys have perpetrated the greatest crime against the American people ever seen. It was a coup d'etat.
This is how sick and twisted these people are.
I recently confirmed that on numerous occasions, the intelligence community incidentally collected information about U.S. citizens involved in the Trump transition.
It was shocking to see some of the overclassification that was done to hide either corruption or abuse of authority and just to make sure certain agencies didn't look bad.
We have a peaceful transition of power process. That's not what happened. There were more meetings, there were more leaks, there were more attacks.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for is what they themselves were doing. Not just the Democratic Party and their operatives, but also the FBI.
If I were writing about the time frame that we lived in and that we're living in now, I would say it wasn't supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to know.
The entire time this was going on, they thought this was going to be what sunk the Donald Trump presidency. And they were just looking for the golden goose, and they still haven't found it because it doesn't exist.
Wow. So it looks like a thriller, and the book read like a thriller. I stayed up with your book a whole night because of the excitement. But people here would not know who Devin Nunes is. So you have two books about this permanent coup, as you called it, in the second book. But your first book focuses, your hero is Devin Nunes. So maybe if you can tell Israeli listeners the story of Devin Nunes here.
I should just say, I saw on your Twitter feed, you said something nice. I think it was about the movie And I translated it to Google Translate in Hebrew, but someone wrote on your Twitter feed, someone said, we're going through a lot of the same stuff here. So who is the Israeli Devin Nunes? And I hope Israel, a place I love, many friends there, Israel definitely merits and deserves a Devin Nunes.
The thing what we envy in America is that Devin Nunes has authority. Our parliament is just a rag at the feet of the judiciary, and what is your FBI and Attorney General is linked to the court. It's the same milieu, so we have no recourse. We envy.
Maybe it comes from another place, but it's very important. Congressman Nunes, he was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and they're supposed to do oversight. And Congressman Nunes is a very, as they describe them here in the United States, very moderate Republican. And those are the kind of people who wind up on that Intelligence Committee because they don't want people going out there and shooting off their mouths. They're handling classified intelligence all the time. They're responsible for oversight of all of our spy agencies, right? CIA, DNI, NSA. But the congressman started to see evidence in the late winter and early spring of 2017 of spying on the Trump campaign. He's, as a Republican, he supported the Trump campaign, supported the president. He was part of the transition team. But the way that he's put it is it didn't really ever have to do with Donald Trump. It had to do with the fact that they were using government resources. The Obama administration spy chiefs and spy agencies were using government resources to spy on a presidential campaign. One of the reasons that many Israelis will not have heard of this or will just simply understand it in terms of, but they were doing the right thing. They were looking at Russia collusion, right? Again, it's the way the press has participated. The terrifying thing that's happened here is, you've heard the President Trump called Comey and McCabe and all these other figures, former FBI senior officials, called them dirty cops. And dirty cops are around the world, right? We have, you grow up in New York and I'm sure you've seen Serpico. You're a film person. You must have seen Serpico, right? One of the great, that's the dirty cop movie right there. It's fantastic. What happened here was, what makes this horrifying is that this was a genuine third world operation tying our spy services to our media, right? It's not that the media was lazy or partisan or they weren't paying attention. The media from the very outset was part of the operation. This is what's horrifying. Again, your Israeli viewers will know, watching the neighboring Arab states, what these operations look like, right? Through the Arab press, which is run out of the Ministry of Information, and the security services run out of the Ministry of the Interior. That's what we had here. What those people have been calling Russiagate was a third world operation joining America's Ministry of the Interior with America's Ministry of Information. So this is why a lot of people do not understand what's happening in Israel, because if you are picking up your news from places like CNN or NBC or the Washington Post, they're not going to report it like that because they were part of this operation. And I want to clarify about these different levels. I'm sure a lot of your audience will have heard of Rachel Maddow or the different people on CNN. And Rachel Maddow, of course, was a huge promoter of the whole Russiagate thing. And Keith Olbermann, the movie showed something about him. The really important press organizations here were our two most formerly prestigious press organizations, the New York Times and the Washington Post. The Washington Post was being fed, right, classified transcripts of intercepts between foreign officials and American officials. This is shocking. As Congressman Nunes has said very often, when they fed these different intercepts, transcripts of General Flynn speaking, the FBI should have been going around all of Washington, banging down doors and finding out who was doing it. it was the Washington Post and the New York Times that were getting fed classified information to prosecute this operation against the president. So it's very serious. It's not just people getting on TV and mouthing off stupid lies, stupid nonsense, like Rachel Maddow, like Keith Oldman, Chris Matthews, whomever. This was a very serious thing where these people were being handed felony leaks. It was actually a crime spree. The number of leaks of classified intelligence that were going to the press, it's shocking. So that's the real scandal here, not just dirty cops, that it was a third world operation.
So just to clarify to Israelis who have not been following all the details, for instance, there is a conversation between the incoming National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, and Sergei Kislyak, who is the Russian ambassador. And this is recorded by American spy agencies, and Flynn is unmasked. And then this transcript, which is supposed to be highly confidential, is handed to the press. And I think it was by multiple sources, right? It didn't happen just once. So that's part of it. But Devin Nunes, in his investigation, ripped out of the FBI a lot of information about the way they cheated the courts in order to get permission for surveillance on Carter Page and the Trump campaign. So we don't have FISA courts, but whenever I try to explain, when someone says, I mean, you probably had this 10 million times, it's a conspiracy theory. Whenever someone says that to me, it's a conspiracy theory. I say, how do you explain that the FBI is cheating the courts in order to get surveillance of a candidate? So how did Devin Nunes originally get wind of that?
He had a number of sources. The first thing that he found that the Obama administration had been unmasking officials. What unmasking means is that on those classified transcripts, the names of the Americans, to protect the privacy rights of Americans, are supposed to be redacted. You're not supposed to be looking at that. But under different circumstances, American officials might want to know. It's like, oh boy, I'm supposed to meet with this Russian official that we have under surveillance. I want to know the American that they're having this particular conversation with, because this conversation sounds really sketchy, right? And this American, so they might want to do something like that. But of course, it's within reason. So that in itself is not illegal. The two things that the Obama administration did was, first of all, the sheer volume. I mean, Michael Flynn himself was unmasked during a 2-month period.
200 and something times. 50 times. Yeah, no, I think it's 50 officials.
No, I'm right, exactly. That many officials. So that was a concern. The other concern, of course, these were being leaked to the press, right? And some of them were original leaks. Some of them were just being used as confirmation. They were giving it to different officials who could now confirm this conversation that General Flynn was having. I just want to say something about, just to go back for a second, because you talk about conspiracy theory, that people say, oh, it's crazy, I don't understand it. Here's the thing that I try to explain to people who don't quite understand all the new, because there's a lot of material and a lot of things going on. General Michael Flynn was a retired 3-star general. He was also the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Defense Intelligence Agency has a number of, I don't know them, I don't have security clearances, but my understanding is that the Defense Intelligence Agency and the head of that has knowledge of a number of different dark programs, very specialized and very important programs that keep American troops and keep American civilians safe, right? Very serious stuff. This guy was the head of a serious intelligence agency. Had he really been suspected of doing something bad with the Russians, that's it, right? The amount of danger that puts American troops, American programs, and American civilians is extraordinary. They're likely to pull someone like that off the street, stick them in a supermax prison, and you don't hear from them again for a very long time, right? Instead, what did they do? They opened up an investigation, right? Fair investigation, because they were worried about him going to a dinner in Moscow where he set up the same table as Vladimir Putin. So that's what I try to explain to people. I say, look, had this really been a serious thing, had anyone really thought that Michael Flynn was working with Russia, an often adversarial power, then again, all sorts of red lights and buzzers go off all throughout real government offices. They don't go through this fake investigation, which is what they did. So that, I think, is an important way to show people what was really happening here. I mean, Israel knows what this is like. If there is someone who is really risking important, vital secrets that are vital to the security and survival of Israel, those people are treated in a very serious manner. It would be the same thing here, but none of those things happened. They were targeting a presidential campaign in order to spy on it. Why? Because apparently this is how the Obama administration worked. They did this during the Iran deal as well. They had American officials under surveillance when they were trying to sell the Iran deal. It's very unpleasant to look back on it. I will be honest and say I was never a big fan of President Barack Obama. Nonetheless, it's dispiriting for all Americans, no matter how much you might not like him, to see an American president who nurtured a culture of surveillance and espionage. And that's what we have, and that's what we've seen here.
So how come the investigation into the unmasking ended up with nothing just recently?
I'm not sure we know that that's the case yet. We know that prosecutor left, but I'm not sure that investigation is finished. Again, it's very important to remember we're getting these reports from, right? I mean, the places like the New York Times and the Washington Post are going to shape all of this reporting to their advantage. And there will be many people in your audience who worked in the army or somewhere else, and they had to study Arabic and they had to read Arabic to understand what the Arabic press is like and the information it's really putting through. It's not like a regular newspaper. You're reading about regime movements. You're reading about inter-regime fights. You're reading about the information they want to put through. That's what our press has become. So the New York Times and the Washington Post, when they're reporting on this stuff, that's what it's like. So I'm not sure that that investigation is actually over. It may be, but remember, there are very important things that are at stake in that investigation, including not the unmasking itself, but the leaks of classified intelligence that went to the press, the names that went to the press, and it still appears to be going on. So we'll see if that develops over time.
And how about the Hunter Biden scandal? Because we've seen an attempt by the giants of social media trying to just shut it down. We've seen the first spin was it's Russian disinformation, of
Surprisingly.
course.
Guess what? Yeah.
But now I saw the New York Times has retreated to some kind of spin. Well, yeah, there was business, but it wasn't tied to Joe Biden. And besides, Donald Trump also has a business account in China. What the hell is that? What kind of argument is that? But are they going to really muffle any influence, or is this getting under the radar? I'll tell you why. Because I got optimistic a day ago. There's a great correspondent, Tal Heinrich. We have an Israeli gal in Washington, in New York now, covering all this, and she sent me things she got in WhatsApp. So I'm saying, is this getting circulating under the radar, or is half America again going to be totally blind to the immensity of this thing?
Someone excuse me, someone told me today that there was an Israeli commentator, newsreader this morning, I think it was, who said, look, we have lots of problems in Israel with our press and our politics. But even in Israel, we wouldn't be burying the Hunter Biden stuff the way it's being buried in the United States. So yes, they've done their best to bury it. I do think it's seeping through. I think people are starting to pay more attention. I hear this from other friends who are saying, oh yeah, people who wouldn't normally be paying attention want to find out what's going on. The really astonishing thing, I think, is that if you go back, you will find that places like the New York Times had previously reported stuff on the Bidens. I don't know if they'd put it in terms of corruption, but they'd certainly put it in terms of their questionable business practices. There's an article which I write about in my most recent book, The Permanent Coup. In December 2015, the New York Times actually reported on Hunter Biden's, again, questionable business relationship with this corrupt company in Ukraine. The Times reported on it. Why? Because at that time, Joe Biden was reconsidering getting back in the 2016 race. The Clinton campaign did not want Joe Biden getting back in the race. So they dropped some dirty information. Not dirty, it was true. They dropped some information on him. That was the context back then. Yeah, when they were all rooting for Hillary, it was fine to drop it on him. But now everyone is burying it. But the astonishing thing is all of these papers have reported this stuff before. So now the idea that they're burying
they're denying it.
Right. That's what's insane. There was one point during impeachment. This guy who writes for the Times now, he wrote for Politico, named Ken Vogel, who did a piece in January of 2017 saying, hey, no, in fact, the Ukrainians really were trying to interfere in the 2016 election on behalf of Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump. And of course, all the Democrats are saying, no, that's a conspiracy theory. That's not true. And you saw different people at the Times who were basically calling the Vogel story, who's now a colleague of theirs at the Times, saying, "Oh no, never mind, forget about it." Like they're gonna pull a Stalin on this guy. They're gonna make him get up somewhere and self-criticize his own article or denounce himself. That's going a little far, but that's how ridiculous it's getting. They're burying all the stuff they've done. It's just insane. You see why when Donald Trump says you don't have to be a Trump supporter to agree when he's describing all of this as fake news, right? We're laughing, but it's an extremely bad moment for a democracy when it's not just a matter of not depending on your prestige press. It's not just a matter of them being partisan, but when they're serving as a platform for information operations, wow, Americans need real information to make informed decisions on how we live with each other and how we act abroad as well. What do we do in the rest of the world? So I would say that actually Israelis should be concerned about it. Everyone outside of the United States who considers themselves a friend of America should be concerned about it because it will affect how we act outside in the outside world. And the fact that we're not getting that information.
This is, in my opinion, it's a result of 4 decades of postmodernism in the university, where you were taught that there are no truths, only narratives. Yeah. And I've been talking to here on this podcast to he's a great guy, Igal Carmon, head of memory. They translate Arabic. I like him personally too. And he said, his aha moment was during the Oslo times. Arafat came back to the territories here, and we were all celebrating peace. And he was giving speeches in Arabic on Palestinian TV saying, this is not peace, don't worry. This is the first stage to annihilate Israel, to roll back Zionism. And Igal speaks Arabic. He's an intelligence officer. And he recorded this and put subtitles on it. And he thought that the earth would shake. And he went to journalists. And a journalist who got our Pulitzer Prize said, I'm not gonna publish any of this. Yeah. But Igal said, but it's the truth. And he told him there is no such thing as truth. There are only versions, and you are against peace. This is what he told him. So what happened to these guys is that they've convinced themselves that there is no truth, only an agenda. And they've lost the creative tension where you report things that don't support your narrative. And I think this is there is almost no journalism like that anymore.
Right.
Which is terrible.
I think it's very strange. I mean, both in, certainly in the United States, political operatives get paid pretty well. I'm like, why don't you just do that? Go work for the campaign or something, or, get a high paying job. What is your problem that you need to write that you need to have your byline on something. I mean, journalism is not that high paying a profession, right? You do it because you like doing journalism, not because you like putting out disinformation.
I don't think so. I think what they are doing, they think that Donald Trump is a disaster. They have this woke attitude, and it's all in the service of that. It's not even self-serving. They are in their own minds. They're fighting for some kind of justice. Lee, before we go, when you made that prediction a few weeks ago, you said Donald Trump is going to win the elections, but it's going to be terrible after that. And just to finish with your permanent coup, what is depressing about your second book is that, reading your first book, I think when they nail Brennan and Comey, this will be over. But your second book gives a feeling that that America is fraying at the seams somehow. So what do you what is your prediction for after the elections? Or your
It's very disappointing that there weren't that John Durham, who's investigating the main piece of this investigation about the FBI's investigation of the Trump campaign. The most disconcerting thing, of course, is that because no one has paid a price for what happened in 2016, we're concerned now going into 2020 what people might feel. They might feel unhindered, right? Well, Comey and Brennan, McCabe, none of these guys paid a price for what happened 4 years ago, so now we just get a free shot. That's a big concern, and we've seen different people, former Pentagon officials like former Defense Secretary James Mattis, who actually has served to destabilize the U.S. government. These people think it's just about Donald Trump, but it's about destabilizing the U.S. government, about making American cities unsafe, making Americans unsafe, their lives, their homes, their property. So that's my big concern.
You mean by saying to Trump, you can't trust the military to
well, what he said as the riots began at the end of May, he was threatening the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, as well as the Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, telling them they needed to walk back their support for what Trump was doing. Because Trump was talking at a certain point about federalizing National Guardsmen and sending them out there to protect different cities where the police were just letting things burn to the ground because of their Democratic mayors and governors who were letting these cities be torched. And Mattis wrote something for the Atlantic magazine saying, oh, this is crazy. Trump is just letting he wants to attack these peaceful protesters. And Milley and Esper better understand. He didn't use them by name, but he referred to things they'd said. They better know what side they're on. Like, this man has destabilized the U.S. government. He knows very well why Trump wants to send troops out there to protect American lives and American property, right? He's not a tyrant. He wants to send people out there to protect them. And the fact that Mattis is saying is lying. He was lying what he was saying, right? This serves to destabilize, to have the defense, the Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs put distance between themselves and the president. It's extremely dangerous, right? We're talking about what's happening domestically. What might happen in terms of foreign adversaries is also extremely dangerous. And I just want to say something about what you said about why they think Trump is a disaster. It's fascinating. If you look at if you really boil it down to what people's complaints are, it's amazing, right? Donald Trump, why is Donald Trump a racist? Because Donald Trump says he wants to close the borders, right? He doesn't want to forbid all immigration. He wants to stop illegal immigration, right? First of all, because it's illegal. Second of all, he wants to be able to protect the jobs of Americans. That's what's racist, protecting the jobs of Americans. The American president who's elected to protect Americans, help further their dreams for prosperity, property, but to want to protect those Americans, he's a racist. So when you look at what the actual complaints that people make about Donald Trump, they're just nuts. I mean, we could take them apart one by one. The whole thing about how he said there were good people at Charlottesville and he's defending white supremacists. I mean, people can go look for themselves on YouTube and find the actual story of what happened. We don't need to rehash that. But if you look at this madness, these people attacking Trump for absolutely nutty reasons, that's what's so And that's one of the things that's so upsetting. It's very difficult to have reasoned conversations. So what I'm looking at is I'm looking at 4 more years of, I hope not hot conflict, but we're looking at 4 more years of a very contentious political atmosphere. And I think that's probably going to be like that for many years to come. But also the hopeful thing is, really, there's a lot of Donald Trump supporters who just, it's not so much they love him, right? Though they do, but it's also the hope that he brings them, the feeling of unity that they feel he brings them. And also he's taking on a lot of dragons. He's going after a lot of stuff that frustrates them or gets them angry. And you look what's happening here in Washington, why our elite, why the Beltway establishment has so much contempt for Americans across the country. And they feel finally that here's a guy, Donald Trump, who stands up for them. It's really moving. It's really impressive. I will say one more thing, which, if you don't mind, which comes back to back to the art and literature of America, the history of America that we've spoken about. I really hope that your viewers will take some time to see some of the president's rallies over the next few days. I was watching, I guess it was over the weekend. He's having 3 or 4 rallies a day. So there's this tremendous energy and charisma. But there's something else too. You're watching and you realize this actually is a once in a lifetime thing. It's not just his energy, but it's part politics, it's part performance, but it's also the way he speaks to people, the way he can hold an audience. It's part of the American story now, right? In terms of like our great American writers, the stuff they write about, the stuff they're interested in. They're interested in Americans. Where's our country going? And that's why we shouldn't be embarrassed about nationalism. It comes from our writers. You and I have spoken about this before. Whitman, Melville, Emerson, all these people figuring out what it means to be American. These rallies, it's another significant chapter. You just see what he does. He goes off script. He'll come back. He'll say, here's what Joe Biden did. But he'll just go off and he'll start spinning out a story. And he's just an incredible storyteller. So I really hope your audience will just spend some time and get a sense of why people love Donald Trump, and also maybe get a more direct sense, instead of taking it through CNN or the New York Times, why people hate Donald Trump and why people may fear him. I think there's no reason to fear him. I think at the very least, people should be interested. But yeah, so I hope they'll do that, as well as one more thing. I'm sorry to keep going on. So that movie that you showed a clip for, I'm very grateful for you showing a clip. That was directed and produced by Amanda Milius. Amanda is a friend, and they optioned that book in July of 2019. I couldn't be more honored or happier that they were interested in the book to begin with. The fact that it's such an extraordinary movie. I mean, right now it's leading documentaries on Amazon. It's at the top. It's number 1. Wow. She is the daughter of a very famous American screenwriter and director himself, John Milius, who wrote Apocalypse Now, directed Red Dawn most famously. And Amanda is a genius. So I hope your viewers will get a chance to check out the film, which is it's really wonderful. And she cuts to the heart of it. And so I can't thank her enough. And I can't thank you enough either for bringing me on today and let me go on at length.
So one word about your experience with the film, because I saw some tweet that you said something about you were involved in writing the script. No, I didn't really do anything. They interviewed me, but other people were much more interesting. Mike Cernovich is great there. Michael Anton is great there. They're much more interesting than me. Devin Nunes is great. Kash Patel, who was Congressman Nunes' lead investigative, interviewed Kash. And Kash is great. He's one of a kind. Both him and Congressman Nunes. These are very. He's a great supporting character for your book. Like we follow him.
He's fantastic. He's a great person too. Great American. But no, so they interviewed me, and the thing that I said that I think needed to be said was, many Americans know, especially on the pro-Trump side, on the conservative side, national side, however you want to put it, they know what the bad guys did. They know what John Brennan did. They know what James Comey did, right? In the plot against the president. They know what they did. The story that needed to be told is what the good guys did, because Americans have this idea rightly of Washington as the swamp. But these are public servants who did the right thing at a hard time. So Congressman Nunes, Kash Patel, Jack Langer, that's the story I wanted to tell. It's finally a story about character, right? People who did the right thing. Michael Flynn is another, someone who did the right thing. You saw in the movie where he gets up and testifies, say, what Obama is saying, what the administration is saying about ISIS is not correct. And he fought the Iran deal. This is not correct. They're wrong. He got fired, which is one thing. But then when they came after him, right, that was something else. But it's a story about character, people doing the right thing at hard times. And Americans need to understand that we have great Americans here in Washington, good people, good men and good women who really represent their country, and they take their jobs seriously. So that's the story I wanted to tell. And Amanda told it beautifully in the film.
We're going to put a link under this video for our Israeli audience. And I really hope, Lee, that your book gets translated, because it's written like a thriller. So
I hope so, too. So that, if not,
I'm going to try and push this agenda, because I think Israelis should read it, too.
I hope you do. How about this? I remember speaking at one point with a senior Israeli official here in Washington, was saying, I've got an idea. He said, you've got the plot against the president. You can do a whole plot series. And what about the plot against the prime minister? So maybe I'll just do that. I'll come and I'll write about everyone going after your prime minister.
Yeah, if we don't have a Devin Nunes, at least we'll have a Lee Smith here investigating this.
Right. I hope, really, I hope for all of my Israeli friends that you do wind up with someone like that. You do come up with a Devin Nunes, people who stick up for, not just the vague idea of the abstract truth, but stand up for regular Israelis and say, hey, it's a big country that's got to take care of all of its citizens, has to love everyone, not just people who consider themselves part of the elite here.
Yeah, we are far behind you in that, but it's an inspiration. So first of all, thank you for your time, and thank you for your work. And I hope we can reconvene sometime after the election and
let's do it. Let's talk about what happened. Hopefully, I'm 6 stories up here, so it should be pretty safe. So I should be easy to talk to. Whatever happens, but why don't we do that? We can get together with Mike Duran maybe as well. Yeah, have a post. Let's do a post-election roundup.
Absolutely.
Tony Bedron. We can get a whole bunch of people on here. That'll be fun.
I'm on it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, this was great.
Have a good day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Dude, bye-bye.